Some faces don't need words. They simply appear, and the entire room falls silent. Heather Marks was one of those phenomena. With her large crystal blue eyes, porcelain skin, and fragile doll-like beauty, she became one of the most distinctive faces of the early 2000s second fashion scene. People called her the doll face, a nickname both sweet and haunting, as if she were destined to play the lead role in a modern-day fairy tale. Yet behind the blinding flashes of the cameras, Heather never truly felt like she belonged. To the world, she was a flawless icon. To herself, her difference often felt like a double-edged sword. When her first steps echoed on international runways, no one realized that this fragile Canadian teenager was walking straight into a merciless game where beauty, youth, and fragility could all be twisted into dangerous weapons. Heather's story is not simply about a girl who rose from obscurity to become the muse of the world's biggest fashion houses. It is also a chilling reminder. In the industry that once idolized 90-second supermodels, perfection often hides like a mask. And behind that mask, there are cracks that may never heal. For Heather, the dark side of fashion was not an abstract idea. It was the shadow following every spotlight that tried to claim her. Heather Marks was born in 1988 Calgary, a quiet city in Alberta, Canada, surrounded by snow-covered streets and mountain air. Unlike girls raised in the chaos of New York or Paris, the beating hearts of high fashion, Heather's childhood was built on simplicity. Her parents lived a modest, middle-class life, far removed from art and couture. They only wished for their daughter to grow up healthy and sheltered, not to be swallowed by the glitter of distant worlds. But Heather was never like other children. From elementary school, she stood out with her unusual height and doll-like features. Her luminous blue eyes drew curiosity, but also unease. While some admired her uniqueness, others mocked her thin frame and delicate face. Heather often felt like a stranger in her own classroom, an outsider who didn't quite belong. While her classmates ran wildly across playgrounds, Heather often sat alone with a sketchbook or a novel, retreating into an inner world where difference was not a burden but a gift. In that solitude, a quiet hunger began to grow, the desire to prove that her unusual appearance was not a curse, but a mark of destiny. Calgary gave her a childhood of both peace and hardship. It taught her patience, resilience, and the strength to endure. And it was from this snowy land that Heather began to dream of another universe, one where her fragile beauty could shine on the world's grandest stage, even as the dark side of fashion waited silently in the shadows. Heather never imagined she would become a model. As a shy teenager, she often avoided stares, convinced her unusual looks set her apart in ways she didn't always welcome. But fate has a way of striking when least expected. At 12, she was encouraged by a family friend to enter a local modeling competition in Calgary. At first, her parents hesitated. They worried the fashion world was too harsh, too unforgiving for a child. Eventually, they relented, believing it would be nothing more than a passing childhood experience. Heather stepped nervously onto that small local runway, her knees trembling. Yet the moment the spotlight hit her, something changed. Her luminous blue eyes became magnetic. Judges and onlookers couldn't turn away. In that instant, Heather transformed from an awkward girl into a revelation. A leading modeling agency wasted no time in approaching her with a contract. Her family's reactions were conflicted. Her parents worried about their daughter losing her innocence too quickly. Heather herself was torn, uncertain if she belonged in that world. But for the first time, she felt her difference celebrated instead of ridiculed. A spark ignited inside her. Perhaps the very features she once despised were the same ones that could take her beyond Calgary's quiet streets. At just 15, Heather Marks left behind the snowy familiarity of home and boarded a plane to New York. There, she faced a universe where perfection was currency and fragility could be preyed upon. It was not unlike the trials endured by the legendary 90-second supermodels, who once defined an era of beauty, but also exposed the dangerous expectations beneath it. Heather was now standing at that same threshold, stepping into the glamorous vortex where the line between dream and downfall was frighteningly thin. For Heather, that first casting wasn't just an entry into modeling. It was the opening chapter of a story that would intertwine light and shadow, glamour and vulnerability, a story in which she would soon discover the unrelenting dark side of fashion. When Heather Marks arrived in New York, she was only 15. At an age when many girls were still worrying about homework or high school dances, Heather had already entered a high-stakes game where the lights never dimmed and judgment could cut sharper than a blade. Yet she quickly proved her presence was not just a fleeting stroke of luck. Her first appearances at New York Fashion Week ignited a meteoric rise. Designers like Calvin Klein, Anna Sui, and Marc Jacobs immediately noticed her. Audiences were entranced by her surreal presence. Wide, luminous blue eyes, porcelain skin, and an almost fragile aura that somehow radiated strength. Heather didn't look like anyone else, and in fashion, that made her irreplaceable. She became the embodiment of a strange new beauty, both ethereal and unsettling. By 2004, Heather was invited to walk for Versace in Milan, a defining moment. Among seasoned veterans, this fragile Canadian teenager shimmered like crystal on black velvet. Versace demanded sensual boldness, yet Heather delivered an unexpected contrast, an innocence so pure it bordered on icy. And paradoxically, that very contrast made her unforgettable. From then on, Heather was everywhere. Chanel, Dior, Givenchy, Louis Vuitton, Prada, she commanded the world's most prestigious runways. Her face graced the covers of Vogue, Elle, and Harper's Bazaar. She became the muse of legendary photographers like Steven Meisel and Mario Testino, who adored her ability to transform into something otherworldly in front of the lens. In every shot, Heather looked less like a girl and more like a haunting vision, drifting between dream and reality. But her career was not only about images, it was about presence. Heather developed a unique runway style. While others stormed the catwalk with fierce dominance, she glided softly, her gaze carrying the weight of a silent story. Critics described her as possessing the cold beauty of crystal glass, a chilling elegance impossible to forget. The pinnacle came when Dolce & Gabbana chose her as the face of their campaign. Her blue eyes gazed down from billboards across Europe, turning Heather from an obscure Canadian girl into a global icon. She was no longer just a model, she represented a new standard in fashion, the celebration of difference. Where the 90-second supermodels once symbolized power, glamour, and sensuality, Heather Marks symbolized the next evolution fragility that somehow wielded dominance. During these years, her life blurred into a carousel of cities. Paris, Milan, New York, London. Every week brought a new show, every day, a new dress. She became familiar with the hiss of zippers on couture gowns, the heavy scent of makeup backstage, and the thunder of applause when lights flooded the runway. Heather once admitted it often felt like floating in a dream, brilliant, overwhelming, and almost unreal. Designers adored her, not just for her looks, but her professionalism. Despite her youth, she was punctual, disciplined, and endlessly adaptable. Karl Lagerfeld and John Galliano, titans of the industry, praised her as a muse who could bring silence to life with a single stare. To the public, Heather Marks became the symbol of a new era, when fashion craved faces that didn't conform to traditional beauty. She was not sharp like Linda Evangelista, nor fiery like Gisele Bündchen. She was something else entirely, an enigma, a doll with eyes that seemed to contain both innocence and mystery. But as always in fashion, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. Whispers began to circle. Could her doll-like features endure as she matured? Would the industry, forever hungry for novelty, still embrace her when time altered that fragile face? By her early 20s, Heather had achieved what thousands only dreamed of. Yet, behind the applause and the camera flashes, she often sat alone in hotel rooms, asking herself whether this life truly belonged to her or whether she was merely playing a role chosen by others. It was a question many legends before her had asked. Even among the most celebrated 90-second supermodels, behind their power lay moments of doubt, exhaustion, and entrapment. Heather's brilliance came with the same unspoken cost, the looming reality that in the dark side of fashion, success and self-destruction often walked hand in hand. Heather Marks was never just another model passing through countless catwalks. She carved out her own space by making deliberate choices and protecting a quiet core of individuality behind her wide-eyed innocence. In a world where models were often treated as living mannequins, Heather insisted on authenticity. She turned down lucrative offers that demanded she compromise her identity, overly provocative shoots, contracts that required her to alter her natural appearance, or anything that would strip away her essence. She understood that what made her unforgettable was her fragility, her unearthly transparency. To surrender that would be to erase herself. Some brands labeled her difficult because she refused to conform, but the visionaries of the industry saw her differently. Karl Lagerfeld once remarked that Heather possessed a power to make silence speak, a rare quality that could transform stillness into presence. Her decisions revealed a hidden strength. In an industry notorious for devouring individuality, Heather proved that one could survive, even thrive, without surrendering to every demand. She became an emblem of selective defiance, reminding the world that a model could embody more than just beauty, she could embody choice. In an age when imitation was rampant, Heather Marks became proof that authenticity could not be duplicated. Her career may not have stretched endlessly, but in those defining years, she left an imprint that no replica could erase. For many, she was not just a model, she was a reminder that the dark side of fashion could be resisted, even if only for a moment. After years of dazzling brilliance, Heather Marks began to feel the crushing weight of what modeling demanded. By her early 20s, she had already lived through milestones that many of her peers were still dreaming about. But early success also meant early doubts. Whispers grew louder. How long could her doll-like beauty last? Would she still captivate once her face matured? The natural changes of a young woman's body, combined with the brutal expectation to remain ultra-thin, drove Heather into exhaustion. Rumors swirled that she struggled with overwhelming pressure, that she withdrew from major fashion weeks to preserve her sanity. Heather never shared details, but her sudden absences only fueled speculation. The fashion world, unforgiving as ever, did not pause. Step away for one season, and your place would be filled by someone newer, younger, stranger. Even Heather, once the most coveted doll face, was not immune to this cycle. Media headlines spoke of her as if she had vanished into thin air, labeling her out of fashion. Yet Heather's response was not dramatic. No scandals, no public breakdowns. Instead, she chose silence. She retreated from the frenzy of endless runway schedules and shifted towards smaller, more artistic projects. For her, it was survival. She wanted to reclaim balance, even if that meant fading from the spotlight. On social media, she remained a ghost. Unlike many of her peers who flaunted their lifestyles on Instagram, Heather posted sparingly occasional glimpses of shoots or quiet moments. To fans, these rare updates were like fragments, proof she was still there, though no longer seeking the blaze of fame. Journalists dubbed her the missing model of the 2002nd. The name was bittersweet. She had once been predicted to rival the staying power of icons like Kate Moss or Gisele Bündchen. Instead, Heather seemed to slip away, but insiders insisted it was by choice. Colleagues remembered her longing for freedom, the freedom to live without the chains of constant judgment, without the cruel magnifying glass of the industry. This was her quiet rebellion. While some contemporaries chased longevity at all costs, Heather refused to surrender her happiness. Her disappearance was not a fall, but a decision. In a paradoxical way, it was both her tragedy and her triumph. The story echoes that of many before her. Even the legendary 90-second supermodels had faced moments when they questioned whether the runway owned too much of their lives. But while some pushed through by embracing the spotlight, Heather chose to let it go. In doing so, she became a haunting reminder of fashion's fragility, brilliance that shines briefly, then fades into shadow. Heather's legacy is not one of scandal or collapse, it is of absence. The absence of a face that once defined campaigns, the silence where applause used to be. For some, this makes her story even more poignant. She did not burn out in flames, she simply slipped away, leaving behind the memory of those piercing eyes that once stopped time. In truth, her story embodies the paradox at the heart of the dark side of fashion. Success in this world can feel intoxicating, but it demands a toll, youth, health, and sometimes the very soul of the individual. Heather chose not to pay that price forever. Instead, she turned away, protecting herself even if it meant being forgotten. For those who remember her, Heather Marks will always be the living doll who walked quietly through the grandest stages, leaving behind a silence that lingers louder than applause. Heather Marks never became a household supermodel in the traditional sense, yet she etched her name into fashion history through something far rarer, a face impossible to replicate. At a time when beauty standards still demanded rigid perfection, Heather appeared as a paradox, fragile yet powerful, innocent yet unsettling. Her career may have been shorter than many of her peers, but it proved that sometimes only a few years are needed to create an icon. She opened the door for a new wave of models who didn't fit conventional molds, reminding the world that uniqueness, not conformity, was the real currency of fashion. Today, when people recall Heather Marks, they remember the doll eyes that once dominated runways from Paris to Milan. Yet beyond her beauty lies a lingering question. Is the true value of a model measured by the length of her career, or by the moments when she made the world stop and look? Perhaps Heather never truly disappeared. Perhaps she simply chose to leave the spotlight to preserve the purest part of her dream. In that choice, she became something different, a quiet icon whose silence resonates more deeply than any applause. Her legacy stands as a reminder. Behind the glamour that once glorified 90-second supermodels lies a fragile balance, and the dark side of fashion spares no one. Heather Marks remains a symbol of what beauty can give and what it can quietly take away.